Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today, man, do we have a special treat on the podcast because we finally get to talk about a brand new M. Night Shyamalan film. Once again, it'll be Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp and the good old Nicolò Grasso who join me to review Trap, both in a spoiler-free section and then eventually getting into a full spoiler conversation. We break down Trap, which follows a serial killer named the Butcher who takes his daughter to a Lady Raven pop concert only to discover that the entire concert has been turned into a trap, with police and investigators trying to hunt him down and capture him after they get a lead that he will be present at the show. From that point forward, a psychological drama and thriller takes place with multiple twists and turns. It is always a joy when we get to talk about Shyamalan, who is truly one of our favorite directors around here, and I will just give a little spoiler and say this one did not disappoint. We have our thoughts, we have our praises, we even have some possible conspiracy theories, and I think that all makes for a really fun Shyamalan episode. Thank you so much for listening today on the podcast. Now let's get to our review of Trap. Okay, friends, and what a treat we have today discussing a new M. Night Shyamalan project. First, Nick, I'm going to turn over to you because me and Jack have been here on the podcast. We've been doing these episodes for a while, but this year you proved that you were a stan. You watched Servant, something very, very few have. Only the top 1% of Shyamalan stans have done it. So I'm going to turn it over to you first before we get, because I know me and Jack love Shyamalan. We're stans. So I'm curious what your take is on Shyamalan and what your initial take is on Trap. And let's do spoiler free to begin with, and then we can get spoilers later on. We don't want to ruin any twist for anyone. So Nick, what are your opening thoughts on Trap?
I really liked Trap. Almost loved it. But I knew that going in, I just loved Shyamalan at this point. It's one of those things where I've been following him. I remember seeing the TV spot for Sixth Sense, and it scared the shit out of me when I was like 5 or 6 years old. And that's when it became kind of like a name for me. But I watched Unbreakable, I watched Sixth Sense, Happening, Signs. Like I've seen all of his films outside of his first two films, pre Sixth Sense. Um, and I really like him. I think he's a very joyful filmmaker, not necessarily for the type of content that he makes, but just for the sheer passion that he has for the craft. Whether he's making like a sort of found footage film with The Visit, or if he's making even a failure like The Last Airbender, it always feels like he's giving 100% of his love for cinema in the projects that he's creating. More often than not, I think his biggest weakness is the casting. Movies like The Happening would be so much better if they had different leads than Marky Mark and Zoe Deschanel. But especially since he came back from Split onwards, he's just been winning for me. You have Glass, you have all of these films. Knock at the Cabin we talked about on this adaptation last year. Like I really love his work, and every time one of his movies comes out, I don't want to know anything about it. And I managed somehow to go into Trap only having seen the memes. I'd seen the meme of like, oh, the concert is a trap, and that's it. I hadn't seen anything else. So I went in almost completely blind, and I had a blast, man. This one is probably one of his funniest films. I was cackling throughout. It is something very interesting and compelling, very Hitchcockian almost in a way, or like Brian De Palma, to have you root for a villain. You're spending the majority of this film just following a serial killer at a concert trying to escape. And, from a vision of goodness, of good versus evil, you want the villain to be caught. But Josh Hartnett is so magnetic, and he's just having such a fun time playing the butcher that you really do want to see him succeed. And he gets into increasingly more bizarre and delirious shenanigans to try and escape this place with his daughter without raising attention. It's almost like watching a playthrough of a Hitman game. And man, like the way that this is almost kind of a concert film was very alluring to me. I was not expecting it. Of course, Lady Raven, the main star of the concert, is played by his daughter. well, that's a very fine job, I thought. That was my biggest fear going in. I was like, is she going to be good? Like, is she going to deliver good acting, believable acting? And she really stands out, which is surprising when she's playing against someone like Josh Hartnett or even Alison Peel later on. And man, just a very, very good film. Like, even the places where it goes in the third act, which we'll definitely get into, apparently that's why a majority of people haven't enjoyed the film, which to me is kind of baffling because it kind of ties everything together, not only narratively but thematically as well. And in terms of tension, it escalates in a very compelling way. Um, I don't know. I really liked it. I have some comparisons with like another movie that I want to draw later on, but they are more into spoiler territory, so I'll save them. But just as general thoughts, I had a blast. It's what, like 1 hour 40, 1 hour 45. Shyamalan always stays in that range, and I love him for that. It's just fun, man. Just I love going to the cinema and just enjoying myself. And the level of freedom that you can feel in the camera work, in the editing, like breaking some rules, reinventing them, reshaping them. The cinematographer is the same one as Challengers and other films from Guadagnino and Shyamalan, and he always makes some very bold choices that always pay off. So um, this is the year of Shyamalan for me after having watched Servant, which is again a banger, like you said. Going into Trap, just the man is doing what he wants, and I love him for that. That's like my dream goal: making the types of movies that I want without feeling obliged to do anything. And yeah, I'll save. I have some other thoughts that are very more specific, and I'll save them for later on about like twists and Shyamalan's career as a whole. But I'm curious to know where you guys stand on this film.
I can go quickly because I think this is going to be not to risk this episode just being us kind of repeating ourselves over and over again, because I'm very similar to you. Obviously, a Shyamalan stan. Not to say every one of his projects works for me. Even modernly, I think Servant makes some choices. Old, I'm not necessarily huge on.
Mhm.
Trap is super fun. Trap is such a fun film. And finally, it feels like this summer where we got like, oh, that isn't really that good, or that movie's okay. Like, we finally have a movie that I can really celebrate and be like, oh, this is a true blast of a feature. Josh Hartnett has probably never been better than he is in this film. He truly is spectacular. But the supporting players all around are quite good. The girl who plays his daughter is quite lovely here.
Yeah,
I don't know if anyone saw, I think it was Blueback it's called. She was quite good in that, but she really gets to shine here. Shyamalan's daughter is fantastic here, dealing with a lot of the same, obviously it's like this thriller, but you get a lot of the same modern themes that Shyamalan is dealing with as far as being a parent, having a connection with your child, wanting to provide your child with the world, but then certain circumstances come up. Again, this is something we've seen in Servant, something we've seen in Old, something we've seen just over and over again as he really digests being a father and his role as a father. I wouldn't say this film is overly deep or poignant to where I'd say like, oh, it makes this profound statement, but ultimately that adds a level of richness to it. Shot wonderfully, as you mentioned, as we are standing the person behind the camera, and just overall, this broods this wonderful mix of intensity and drama as you realize that something has to erupt. It's kind of like watching a volcano in its final moments, where you're like, there's an eruption coming. You don't really know what's going to happen. But also beyond that, it's just incredibly fun of a journey. It has everything I think you would want for a film to close out the summer season. I certainly enjoyed this one a lot, and it definitely provided me, as a Shyamalan stan, something that I can appreciate, and I'm happy so many are appreciating. It's always with Shyamalan. I'm always worried what everyone else is going to think, because I'm probably going to like it. I mean, I'm a huge defender of Glass. I just hope everyone else is on the same wavelength with me in the cinema, going, hell yeah, that's great. And everyone was. So I am tremendously happy with what we got with Trap. Jack, hopefully you're not the one to break this streak of liking it.
No, not to run the risk of repeating it. Also, but I think we've done this podcast enough now where it's last since I think since 2019 we've done Glass, we've done Split, we've done Old. I wasn't on Knock at the Cabin, but now we're doing Trap. We've been here for a long time, and I feel like this always opens up with the same sort of excitement, especially for me and you. I know Nick, you've warmed into M Night, which I'm glad a lot of people have as well. But I want to leave that for a lot later because I think that should be mentioned. But I think we do this thing where we get really excited when it's announced. We get sort of this warmth in our hearts knowing that we're going to see another film. The trailer comes out and it's gets a very. I don't want to use the word hype because I think it's it's a bit redundant, but I think there's another layer of like another excitement to it. And then the first bit of press comes out where everything just sinks a little bit. And I think we've done this now. I've done this now since 2015 with The Visit. I think that's what, as far as I go back. I think of his like renaissance. To me, The Visit is the one. Even before Split, Split is him just putting stuff together that he's been wanting to do for years. But I think The Visit is the one where I'm like, this guy is he's back on track. But that'll be for another day. I hope. But it's the same routine. We get back into it, and then they're not showing press to anyone, which is like, oh, that's a slight worry. I try to resist the trailers as much as you do, Nick. I really do. But and when it's on YouTube or something like that, I don't look. And every so often when I'm at the cinema, I sort of go on my phone when the trailers are there, not when the film starts, but when the trailers are there, because I try to reject it as much as possible. And this and Alien Romulus, which ironically enough they're doing next week, is showing constantly. But they never showed trailer 2. It was always the first trailer, so it was always like this tongue-in-cheek thing. So going into this, I was like, oh, because I don't like you. I don't want to come out of here like. I think I'm probably more positive on everything I've seen of his. I know you just said, Carson, you've dipped. Nick, I think you probably would be the same. I think this is weirdly similar to Knock at the Cabin for me, where there's a director here who's incredible at staging, crafting suspense. He always has. But those films felt like idiosyncratic to him. This one feels like he's back doing something and echoing something else, if that makes any sense. I could not help. I hope I'm not stealing Nick's point here. I could not help watching this and think, he's not doing Brian De Palma here, is he? Oh my god, he's doing Brian De Palma. And he does Snake Eyes, Psycho 2, and there's probably another film in there that we'll leave a little bit later on. And I think this is really, really, really good for 3/4, and then the last act is just good. But everything else is really good. The scene, the blocking, like the constant going back and forth with the characters, it's never dull. It's quite exciting. There's a very strange tone in here, but it feels consciously acceptable because of our characters. A little bit not non-human, let's say, which I was waiting for something to come up there, because this felt very similar to a film that came out in 2017 that was Split. I want to leave a little bit later as well. I was slightly aghast, thinking, oh, he's not going to, what I think he's going to do here. Because I was like, oh, God, she's not going to turn out to be someone, is she, the FBI lady. But I was like, thank God. It's very much a remote feature. Well, you don't know after a Split, do you? I just don't know. But they're... I feel slightly sorry for him, because I walk into this and I'm thinking, this guy's like it's $35 million or $45 million, what it was. It's very straight laced. You get what you get. It's fun. It's quite camp. It's very uncomfortable. It's funny. It's constantly and consistently entertaining. The craft on show is like, I don't know how many people could maintain that rhythm, that pace. It never feels like it's a slog. There's always a constant 10-minute mark where something happens, and then people just seem to don't really reciprocate with the material, which was just strange. The first things I've been hearing, but for me, this is just a classic continuation of M. Night Shyamalan into his own canon. It's not as good as Old for me, into the sense of going somewhere a little bit fun with it, but this one feels like retained a little bit more into reality, and he's heavily going from other people here. I would say, if I'm going to end this very briefly, I would say this feels the one where if you put them in line with each other, Glass, Split, The Visit, not so The Visit, let's say the Split, Glass, Old, and Knock at the Cabin, I have to say this one feels distantly related to the others. And I don't know if that is the cinematographer. I don't know if that is the production. I don't want to go into it because I don't want to go into spoilers, but there's a change of course here. And for me, it was really fun to watch, and I think it saves it. Don't get me wrong, but I was really hoping he would, for the most part, how do I word this now? Sort of stay within a certain limit, and to really excel himself as a filmmaker. And he doesn't, but he does it for the plot, which works. Don't get me wrong, but it was really enjoyable. I tell you one thing: there's like bits in here where Josh Hartnett's frightening. He's like staring at the camera. He's laughing. His muscles in his face, how they contract. there's a very uncomfortable nature here. I think the performances throughout. There's a lot here where people are going to nitpick this and go like, oh, he could be the next Joker. Which when you look at that, I feel that's like quite derogatory to the statement. Anyone making like a little bit of an impact of tone is automatically like astounded to be like, oh, he's capable of playing one character that three people have played in the last 12 years. But I think he's fabulous here. Really, really good. Really, really powerful. Really good screen presence. And I'll just end on this. Josh Hartnett's uh, projection here of tone is fabulous. Honestly, there's a. It's like the only. I don't want to keep it in house, but the only comparison is James McAvoy in Split. Like the constant notion of unpredictability and again contextual that's different to characters, but this was tonal. I thought it was fabulous. There's not one sequence here where you can read that character, even when the film is projecting where he's going or the thematic or whatever it is, the direction, the narrative. He is always a step in a different direction that takes it a little bit of a twist on the usual. And I'm just shocked that no one's really talking about this as much. I think this is a fabulous film. I can't wait to talk about the final act. But for the most part, this was really thrilling. I laughed on multiple occasions here, which I don't feel guilty about at all. I hope you two did. I don't want to sound like the psycho in the room. But there was bits here where I was like, oh, he's just playing with us. He's having fun. Like and I don't think many people got this. I hope it's not a glass situation where people went in with perhaps a superhero motif in store and were left with a subverted tale. I don't think it's that smart. This, I think it's quite hard to take a character who is doing things and is acting a certain way, and we've got to find an emotive connection with it. But I'll leave it to whoever who's got cast next. But for another M Night Shyamalan movie, and his daughter Shana had one this year as well, which were a bit sort of mixed on. We're living good, we're eating good. He's got three more in the pipeline. We're back, baby.
This is kind of news to me. I thought this was really well received, to be honest. And now I'm looking at seeing
Really?
it's rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. Everything I heard about this online and with people IRL were like, "Oh, it's great! Like this is one of M Night Shyamalan's best films." But now I'm seeing it's rotten on Rotten Tomatoes. The
Yeah.
audience score is a little bit higher, 65%, which is still mixed, but a little bit better than what's like
Like a
54% on Rotten Tomatoes for critics.
2.9 on Letterboxd as well.
That's crazy to me because I think this is like such a crowd pleaser. And again, everyone I've seen this talked about this too online and in real life both loved it. I think it is interesting though. I have seen some people mention like the strange moments of dialogue and some of the little quirks here that M Night Shyamalan puts in, which I think all comes back to that main character as you kind of mentioned, Jack. Such an enigma character in a way that I don't think we've seen on screen much, where like even up until the final act and the final moments of this film, you never really know what game he is playing. You can always project and try to find little bits and pieces here, but consistently changing on expectations, as you mentioned. I found that to be probably the most engaging part of the film, and I think this is maybe one of Shyamalan's best characters in a while. What I will say is, you mentioned that this film feels different compared to his recent work. I feel like this feels very different compared to like his entire filmography.
Oh
This
wow.
is for me a very different film than anything he's produced previously. Not just is there little things like I think the twist here is obviously really downplayed in the end compared to what we've seen previously. I also thought there was a moment in the third act where I thought we were going full. There was like an almost like a action sequence, you could say, where I was like,
Mm.
oh, this is like we're doing this. I'm about to
Yeah.
see something or a score. I'm waiting for a certain score to kick in. Didn't happen
Yes.
again. Thank you. But I was really prepared for something here. I think I was going to be the only one cheering. But yeah, I agree with everything you said pretty much. I mean, I think that this is, though, for me, Shyamalan, because I think one key point of Shyamalan's career is like the emotion in all of his films, right? It gets when he gets to Old, you get to the ending. There's a very clear emotional weight to that film. Knock at the Cabin is the same. The Village is the same. There's always that big emotional kind of outburst towards the end. This film is really downplayed, but a lot of that is because of the character. You're not supposed to know the emotions of the character. You're not supposed to resonate. You're not supposed to necessarily have this like empathy for him, or you think you do, and then he again turns on his back and you don't really know what he's thinking. I think that's the key thing, that if you go into an M Night Shyamalan film, you're constantly waiting for it to kick into that second act. You're constantly waiting to kick into that second gear. I don't know, outside of some narrative choices that we'll get into, this film really has that. So I feel like that might be where some people are coming away from this. And I'll admit, like, it's not my top tier M. Night Shyamalan film. This is definitely more in the middle. Granted, that's still
Same.
pretty good. But that's largely why, is I just think, like, fundamentally, this film is Shyamalan trying to have fun. He's trying to have fun in the filmmaking. He's trying to have fun in the narrative. He has bits and pieces here of deeper conscious. But for me, this felt very much so like one of his lighter efforts, which is not bad, but I think inherently is notable.
I agree, and it's not necessarily something that I completely agree with you as well, that it's not something that's necessarily bad. It's like, it's fine for a filmmaker to make something that's just fun, something that's very explicitly made as a way to push his daughter's career. Was also a pretty good singer. Like, those songs, they're not bad. Like, I like that concert. I'd like to be in the crowd for Lady Raven. But I will lightly push back on the emotional aspect, which is something that I've been thinking about for the past 24 hours, just digesting the film a bit more. And that's something that I was thinking as well, because we get to the end and I was like, it's lacking that punch. Like, Old made me tear up, Knock at the Cabin, even Glass, in a way, it gets very emotional at the end. But with this one, it has a very more upbeat ending, you could say, including like a mid credits joke that's very funny, very effective. But that's because, in a way, the emotional core is presented very, very early on in the film. And one thing that I really like is that Shyamalan, in the first 10 minutes of the film, he sets up a father-daughter relationship that feels very genuine and very awkward, in the way that a lot of fathers can be when trying to be hip and cool with the kid, trying to please them. And it's very charming. It's very well written, I think. It's very well performed by all of the actors. But it never ends up being, the work of a sociopath. Like, this guy actually genuinely cares about his daughter. He's actually, like, doing a thing he wants to do for her. He cares about her. He wants to make her happy. He brings her to the concert because he loves her. And that through line, while it's like lightly abandoned towards the end for other reasons, I think that's what kept me engaged in the film, is that you're seeing a father who's a serial killer, like a man trying to evade police custody, but also trying to give his daughter a good, memorable experience. And that's kind of paid off in the end, before the final scene. But I appreciated that. You don't really see that much when you're talking about like serial killer film. It's always like, oh, they're so twisted and perverted, and they have terrible family lives, or it's like this complete facade. And instead, he tries to keep those two elements separate, which some people have read, as you were mentioning as well before, as it's like the director's job of keeping job and family separate. It's the artist coming through, but one thing ultimately clashes with the other. Yeah, it's kind of there, but also I appreciate that it's not explicitly about a bigger theme, which makes it kind of like a mid-tier film in that sense, because it's lacking that extra layer. But I think this element of just the father-daughter relationship, which is already very rarely seen in films, I think, it's refreshing. And one thing that I'm just shocked about, like, I watched Old, and I totally get why people didn't like it because of the dialogue. Knock at the Cabin, some of the performances are a bit hammy. But in here, like, I don't know how someone can watch this film and feel like the dialogue is a bit too much, or the performances are like a bit off or stilted. I think this is one of the more grounded, in a cinematic sense, films that Shyamalan has made. It doesn't feel way too, like you said, Jack. Actually, I think the Snake Eyes comparison is spot on. Like, you could do a double bill of these films; it would actually be very intriguing. Um, it's not that much weirder than having Nicolas Cage just running around hamming it out in a sports stadium, in a casino. Um, yeah, I'm baffled by the reception to this.
I think this all comes down to, not good to go on like a film lesson here, but it all comes down to, and we've done this throughout his filmography, but specifically we spoke about Uncut Gems, and the change happens with a village, because before that you have 4 features that, and this is quite ironic now, and this is like a dissonance, but essentially unpredictability became predictability in Shyamalan's career. You have The Sixth Sense, Wide Awake. I don't. You've got to put on one side. You have a totally different type of filmmaker. You have The Sixth Sense, and then you have Unbreakable. Then you go into Sand, and you go into The Village. and everything is quite deadly serious, and all of them. They've all got very not, it's not said dark, but very quite heavy thematics, and the tones are not very light-hearted. Although there are quirks, the first three anyway, Signs begins to crumble with it. Not crumble, but at least let them in, and then the village is probably back on form. But you have this sort of idea where he was given this mantle, the next Spielberg. And I think when it came to the village, and I'll try and breeze through this because I know we spoke about this quite a lot on the episode on Uncut Gems. There comes a point where he has to sort of take that mantle, throw it away, and then goes Lady of the Water. People reject it on this commercial viewpoint. He wanted to make a fairy tale for his kids, for his girls, which I think is actually quite an admirable thing to do, especially when you've got the place to do it. And ironically, now he's giving Ashana literally another mantle. We're making films as well, which I think is quite poetic. And then after that, he has to then go back to making a commercial M. Night Shyamalan feature, and he sort of second guesses himself at the happening. Then he gets rude in the critic circles, and then he goes and makes Last Airbender, which he put a lot of time in, which I thought was interesting because he never had a commercial vehicle that he hadn't written before. Then he went and made After Earth, and all these films become quite cold. I found are very cold. That they're always very one note. His films that in that period. Even with the happening, it creeps in quite consistently where it's very one note, very, very cold. There's not much joy, there's not much hope. I don't know if that's a personalised thing, although I can imagine that there's a creeping of the career, there's the critic circles coming in, those who once lifted him up are now trying to break him down. And then he goes on to make The Visit in 2015, or 2014, 2015, I think, and he takes...
15, yeah.
Yeah, he self-finances, which I think is so important to have in this discussion. He doesn't risk anyone else's money then. And I think for a filmmaker who if I've read about him doing interviews, the impression I get, and I don't want to speak for him here, is that he has imposter syndrome quite a lot. I don't know if that's because of his ethnicity in Philadelphia as well, of being from Asian descent. There's an interesting parallel there that he has in his filmmaking, perhaps feeling like, I've done really well here, but I don't feel like I'm accepted, and that's also possibly a societal thing. I think is very interesting in this framework, if that is indeed true, and if it is, what sad state of affair that is for social norms. But then you get into this idea where he self-finances and the confidence just bang, it comes back, and you find that with The Visit, there's a strange warmth there. I don't want to spoil that either, but there's a grandparents, there's a strange twist there. Then you go to Split, where there's a weird warmth between Kevin Crumb and Anya Taylor-Joy, and then you get to Glass, and there's a form of hope, but not. There's it's a devastation, but hope, and then you continue this with Old. It's brutal, but there's hope. Knock at the Cabin, it's brutal, it's hope, and here. This is where I say it's totally different because there's very little. I don't want to use the word hope because it doesn't feel accurate to describe this plot. But I found this as the first one where you have a three-dimensional character who is unnerving the audience by being unpredictable, and for the first time, probably since, actually probably never, as written as this, as to be three-dimensional, is that he's having fun writing someone who is having fun, or in a very seedy, uncomfortable, and uncouth manner, let's say. And that enjoyment I get when I can watch this and can see that writing blooming. I'm there. I'm so immersed, and I think that's why I find this totally different from his filmography, especially from the last film. But I think Carson, you're probably on the ball there from everything. But because of that, I found this even more inviting. I don't know if that's now a rejection from other people in the sense of, well, I was expecting M Night again, and this is different. My only fear of that is we've been through this before in 04, 06, and 08 with him, and I hope now that there's not this. I think he's not an elder statesman now, but he's in a different act of his career. His daughter's come through. His other daughter's wildly successful as a pop star, and she's in this, which we'll talk about later. But I think there's a. I don't want to swear here because I've been watching the clips Carson's been posting, and it's sometimes I swear and it's horrible. But I think the guy doesn't care anymore in the most positive, freeing sense. I think he's like, I'm not bothered what you've got to say anymore. This is my money. I'll risk it. And if you don't like it, you won't like it. But there'll be people out there who does, and that has freed up a filmmaker. And so many filmmakers, I think, don't have that, who don't have that freeing feeling of that ability to be like, I need to get this weight off my shoulders. And I think it's for whatever happens now, till whenever he stops making films, I hope there's hundreds more, 10, 15 more. I find them all so engaging because they're just interesting pieces of film, and that the cinematic craft here is very, very good. I mean, everything feels like a filmmaker's like. I did, I never even second guessed anything. I was looking at every detail here. The constant pans away when we're there to look at the police from his perspective. We know something's happening. We don't know at that time. The very slow zooms into this guy's face. Really, really, really interesting type of filmmaker who knows what he's doing. And again, it's having a ball watching it. But when you said, Carson, about the critic scores turned, this opened on Friday for many people in England. I might have had Thursday previews, and it's very difficult to find like screening times because they only update on Fridays anyway. Friday night, I just saw 2.5 twos, threes, 2.5 threes, and I was like, it's not new because we've seen that before. I think you've got to go in with that mentality. You've got to sort of, and without being patronising here and condescending, you've got to go and understand who this creative prowess, what it is. It's not. It's like going to Picasso and be like, he can't paint faces very well. It's a creative spark. It's just something different. It's a different palette, and you either vibe with it or you don't. And to go into this, I'm just happy to report again. This is just so much fun, and the De Palma influence here, another filmmaker I adore. God, it's so good. We've seen so much De Palma influence recently, and what I feel like I've been watching. I loved it, but it just feels like a director just proving another point. I love that. I love that. But I'll let someone else talk. But God, it's so fun to watch this, and I would love to have watched this with some friends. That sounds really sad when I've said that. But I think to watch this in a group party, nobody knows, sit in a dark room and let this character manipulate the audience, not knowing. Oh, what fabulous! I wish you wouldn't have done anything in the trailers, and it would have been fabulous. But I know.
All equally good films that are inspired by De Palma recently, all just equally of strength in the horror genre. I will say before we get into spoiler discussion, which I think we're kind of jumping for, the one thing we're like, it's not even necessarily a negative because that's part of the joy, right? Is there are so many film moments in this film where I'm screaming at the screen, like, why would you do this? That's the most illogical thing for a character to do. Like, I'm going crazy. Like, that's insane. I do think there are some jumps in logic here. This specifically, like, I don't really understand how this is a trap, to be completely honest. I don't really get the logic behind the trap itself, but valid. There are some moments towards the end and we're just like, that is if I had to knock this film on one thing. And again, it is just like such a fun ride that you can turn your mind off and just enjoy it for what it is. Not every character has to be a genius, but there are a few things here where I do think maybe the logic was a little underwritten, but that would be my one complaint, I would say, as far as overarching. Is there any negatives you guys would like to get into before we jump into our spoiler review?
Yeah, I have problems a little bit with the pacing towards the end. We'll get into why later, but just um I think the crescendo during the concert is so good that when where it goes next, it was kind of like, oh wait, it's like two movies in one we're getting here.
Mm-hmm.
um and yeah, it's yeah, I think that's probably the only real negative that I have. Because other than that, I found it to be quite solid. It's not one of those movies where you can just easily pinpoint, just like, oh, this is bad. Even just some logic leaps that you were talking about, they didn't particularly bother me. It reminded me a little bit of, The Killer with Michael Fassbender. Where he's just taking some different routes to do some things and he's manipulating people and whatnot. It is like playing the video game Hitman. So it didn't bother me too much in that sense.
I'm going to try and be very surface here because you've mentioned one or two of them, and I'm going to bring them back Carson allows us to go into a bit more spoilers, but the one thing, his daughter's in this way too much. That character, way too much. And it's interacted to a point where it goes into issues where you sort of question, right? Logic then becomes an issue, but when these type of films, I sort of allow that to wash over me. But then that's where I think the pacing faults, because there's about a 15-minute gap here after the act two, where he has written to a point where he needs to get to part C, and we're at A, and where B comes into question, it's a bit of a slog, but it also feels a very strange way to formulate that within the narrative, and also perhaps it's second guessing itself because it has to then subvert your expectations of what we expect of this narrative to actually happen with Harnett's character trying to get away, and then it sort of succumbs to that idea and then was like, oh no, we'll throw this. So it does work, and I think there's a lot of that about in certain pacing issues where we'll get towards the final act where there's a lot of like, we go back and then we go forward and we go back and we repeat the same action in a different scenario, which feels very much like a deleted scene. One specifically we'll get into, I think, where I'm like, we're just like going. I don't know, but I do feel like his daughter's in that for far too long. Nothing against her acting prowess, which I think was a surprisingly like positive for me as well. I thought she was how she like showcases. Not necessarily. I don't want to go into specifics, but she's involved in this more than probably one would examine, and how she convicts on that with the emotional level was quite well executed. Problems. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a problem, but it'll be an issue here. There's a creative choice in terms of setting here, where I felt, not knowing where this was going narratively, that we would be watching a director fully encompass this setting, very much like Snake Eyes and Brian De Palma, and with concerts usually lasting like 2.5 hours, 3 hours. To me, I was sort of slightly involved that we would be here for a long time, and it very goes quick in the sense of, I think what you said, Carson, about or maybe Nick said it, I do apologise, about finding escape routes. It becomes slightly more, not necessarily predictable, but repetitive, and those are the leaps in logic to me where I'm like, we've just seen, in fact, people put cameras everywhere, and there's a certain action within the stadium where I'm like, and we didn't catch that, or we're going up to a roof and there's a quick-witted thinking that then you buy into it because of this character, but it was always like, are we not going to question anything else? But I just go back into that idea of M. Night Shyamalan's idea of like law and authority, of being slightly not dense, but twisted for another idea. Because I think there's a theme here of wanting to catch this person for fame and fortune rather than is for the well-being for victims here. There's probably a read. I don't think it's very evident here, but there's a read nonetheless. What else are negatives? I love the split diopter shot in here as well. Oh God, it's like Brian De Palma again. I was like, there's stuff in here where I'm like, you can tell. Like, I know you're asking about negatives, but I have to say this as well. I know I've mentioned this before, but I was like watching a director who had watched his favorite films for prep, and it's all in here. And I know for a fact Nick would do this. Watch a Lynch film or watch something like because you've already said on the podcast before about taking bits. Oh my God, I love that. Like he makes it his own. It's not a Tarantino thing where it's ripped. This is manipulation, which goes back into the plot. But again, just to answer your question about slight negatives without spoiling it, this takes quite big, giant leaps of patience from its audience. And I think you get this idea that we're being manipulated by this character, which is quite saddening when his daughter's there. That relationship's really interesting. I don't think that the audience are giving enough ideals of how bad this character actually is. It's called the Butcher. We see certain things, but it's limited. I don't necessarily understand why. If it's limited, that we want the shock. wouldn't that be more beneficial for what happens towards the final act, especially the second one? I feel like not. I don't want to not be a witness to anything, but it's almost like it's a fleeting idea of oh, this character's actually done this. This is how he does it. This is operandi. I don't need to see him carving up people or anything, but I think having that added bit of texture really puts more emphasis on the torment and the manipulation we see later on. But because we don't, I got the feeling that there was a slight resemblance of sentiment for this character and a bit of emotional leeway, which reminded me of Don't Breathe 2, and I had like a slight shock in the cinema where we're giving emotional leeway in that film to like a serial rapist, really, and then in this film we're like he's horrible, he's manipulating his own daughter, he's manipulating everything he can see fit, but we're giving him a bit of room here. And I didn't particularly find that a strong characteristic, and I felt like it was probably the wrong stroke of a brush and a wrong colour for me. But I'm very interested to see what Carson's going to say, because I'm there's going to have to be picking and choosing here, I'm sure.
Well, there's two things I'll respond to as far as what you just mentioned, as far as not showing us, maybe giving him some leeway. The first, I think, is just like, this is PG-13. You can only show as much, which is a weak excuse, but ultimately, this is PG-13 trying to make money, so you can only show so much. I also think, like, I don't know, it would kind of ruin the film, I think, if you fully, like, didn't have that little bit of leeway, because it will very quickly become not so fun watching a serial killer try to get away. Like, ultimately, you need that leeway so you can engage on the roller coaster. I think they do a good enough job at the end to really show like he is evil. But like, if he just truly is like, and a lot of films do this. It's like this is gonna be a weird comparison, but Sean Baker's Red Rocket, where like I can have fun with this character because it's like he's so gross openly on screen that like I just cannot engage with having fun in this film, because very quickly it becomes not fun. If you just saw him like brutally butcher people, very quickly I would not be having fun seeing him try to like, ooh, can I get out this way? Like very quickly I think it would fall apart. So for me, actually, I would say that's something I appreciate. Again, if it wasn't PG-13, you could definitely hit that home more towards the end when you've already gone on that roller coaster ride. I think that's totally a great idea, actually. But I understand there's also filmmaking limitations and you want to make money, so I get it. But for me, I would say I didn't really have an issue with that personally.
What do you guys think of score?
Not particularly noticeable. Like outside of the songs, which I think most of them were already made prior to the film. I don't think there's anything original, maybe even. But yeah, like it's very unobtrusive, which is not a negative per se.
Wow, I would disagree there. I thought that the actual soundtrack with his daughter was quite rudimentary. I thought it was quite conventional, but I thought that was just sort of an appropriate stance on modern pop music. But there's a certain song she sings on a piano here that's it comes back. That to me wasn't again. It didn't really have the bounce and the again that really foreboding feeling, because you so up and condensed into this plucky survival instinct that you don't really take much on board. And I was like, oh, I hope this is so it's over, it's covert here, and there's something else happening. But it wasn't. It wasn't like it. But again, I love that fabulous. We're even double guessings now, which I think is really fun. But I thought the score was quite good. I thought the score was very underneath. I thought that it was quite again always in the foreground, but like travelled really well. I thought it was very unnoticeable and surprisingly. For me, the M. Night scores are quite close to my heart, and the Unbreakable score. I think me and Carson here, like, the Village score by James Newton Howard, like, oh my, the Gravel Road, like it could bring a tear to my eyes. It's brilliantly the Unbreakable thing, yeah. But you've got like this feeling here where it's weirdly not able to be a part of the film, because then it takes away from another construct that's the personality of the film, which is the actual soundtrack. So they're constantly battling. But I thought that when it came up to have a rise and a low, I thought it did an admirable job. But again, yeah, I think it's very much one of the films where, like Old or Knock at the Cabin, they're there and they help the image, but they're not evocative as they once were. And his very early works like the Signs and the Village, particularly to make an emotive stance here. Although I guess you can probably argue that his daughter's music fundamentally flavors like that. But that's all I would say about the score.
One thing I will say, kind of building off that, is while I do like Lady Raven, I think the concert itself was strong. I think the songs were fine for what there were. I was kind of surprised there wasn't like one that really stood out to me as being like even just as a showcase like of her music. I just thought they were all pretty forgettable songs in general. Like they have a fine sound. I don't know. That was something just like that caught my my eye, or I guess rather my ears. Is that I didn't think there was anyone that really stood out to me and stuck with me after this, which is sad. Like even in musical films like Vox Lux, right? There's songs that like I can remember, and there are songs that really leave an impact. Here, there really weren't any, which I guess to a point, it's background ultimately for a film you're watching. But even if just like selfishly, I was to put my daughter as a musical career and be like, showcase yourself, I would want something a little bit stronger than this. But I don't know, not to hate
How
on
did
her.
it stack up against the Eras tour, Carson?
I was thinking that the entire time. I was like, this was nothing on Eras.
You wanted to be somewhere else, didn't you? I could tell.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I'm gonna make a fan edit actually and switch it out.
that'd be brilliant. Yeah.
Digitally insert Taylor.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting choice with to put. Look, this I don't want to get too much into this because I feel like this is probably a conversation that's not for me. But I think it's interesting to have had the career he's had, to bring one daughter through, very much in a way that he was devastated on a very much public stance within a critical forum. To bring his daughter through that, it's very interesting, and then to bring another daughter through was very wildly successful in her own right. Through image as well as sound in this, I think is quite a brave endeavor. But who better to do it with family to ride that storm as well? And coming out of it, I'm quite pleased to think that no one's really going at these. It's not a thing where it's detriment to the film. Because I can imagine if this doesn't work, and I think it wasn't a major thing for me until it became a major thing. And I was really hoping that there wasn't going to be a hiccup, because I would have hated to have thought that with Ashana's debut not hitting the intention critically and commercially, I was just hoping, and more so like wanting to see this family succeed, like a little bit, And I know that they don't owe us anything; they're nothing to us. But I just thought it'd be a compelling notion to know that, like, yes, and I thought that was quite a warming faction of it, where it's like, oh, thank God, like it worked, because I was waiting, because you can tell the Twitter sphere, they're like, oh, nepotism's come into this, and all sorts of just shite. When pardon speaking French there, but there's a lot on Twitter at the Hemisphere where we talk about nepotism in correct stances. This one feels a bit different, and also I have to mention this because I saw it on Twitter and I saw someone describe Napoleon as it, and I sort of like twitched. And it set me off before I was tweeting in the car because I was 20 minutes early because I was so excited to see this. And someone described this as bad. And I know I'm taking over here slightly, but this really pisses me off. This, I don't know how we can describe the form of cinema in such an absolute minute term as bad. What does that even mean? To describe this as bad is utterly nonsense to me. Even if you don't vibe with the tone, which asks a lot, even if you don't vibe with the narrative, which again asks a lot, and even with the thematic, which again asks quite a lot, you can't say this is fundamentally bad just straight up, because the quality of what's on screen here, I think even a seasoned director would struggle. And I was reading beforehand, coincidentally, and this is going to make my opinion of the film even more so proud, is that I was reading about the cinematographer for Sidney Lumet's 12 Angry Men, and they were like, it's the easiest thing to do in the world, just 12 men in a room. And then they start production and realised we're in the shit here, because we've got to position lenses. So they start with 40s and 50s, then they get up to the 80s, and they get to the 100 millimeters, and then you can start seeing the walls and the roof as if it's closing in. And I think anyone thinking, oh, you can just shoot in a concert room, no, you've got to have a wonderful blocking. You've got to have really good scene division. You've got to have iconography that feels like nothing's blurring. You've got to stand these characters out. And I just think cinematically, even just visually, it's really adapt, and it's really well done. And I think that, again, just to end on a bit of a positive, if we go into spoilers, I just want to see a bit more of that. I want a bit, because Nick, you highlight straight away, and obviously the Luca gang, Carson's not going to be far behind you. But I don't think I've heard that. I don't think I've heard that being it hitting anyone on Twitter yet. I don't think that's been a major discussion point. And I think that there's a wonderful craft here, and people seem to want to forget it because they want to see a twist, or they want to just Josh Hunter does something silly, or there's a gamble in it. I think it's a bit of a derivative conversation when we've got so much skill behind the camera here.
Very last thing I'll mention before we get into spoilers. Did either of you see the Watchers poster in this? The billboard?
Yeah, in the background when the SWAT vans
when they walk
arriving,
into the concert, they have the Watchers there.
Did they really?
Which I love. I agree. I like this family. I care about this family like probably more than I should, as far as like I will watch anything any of them create. Like I just want them to succeed. So he always does these things, like these tiny little things where it just like warms my heart, and I'm like, maybe it's because he's the father I never had, and I'm just like, that is so sweet that you put your daughter's film, like terrible film now. Sadly, I probably would have edited it out, to be honest, if I was him. But he has his little billboard there, so this will always be his daughters there together. That's adorable. I hope everyone is enjoying our Trap review, but I wanted to pop in quickly and just give you a reminder that if you want even more ClapperCast, you can get it by subscribing to our Patreon at patreon.com/ClapperCastPod. For only a couple extra dollars a month, you can gain access to an entire library of bonus reviews alongside new reviews every single month. This month we took a look at Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, as part of our summer blockbuster series. Previously, we had an episode on Jurassic Park as part of the blockbuster series, and we just have a ton of really fun episodes. We have a John Waters double feature. We have me and Alina deep diving into the Iron Claw. We have John Couture reviews. We have a ton of extra stuff on the Patreon that you cannot find anywhere else. I mean, genuinely, some of my favorite episodes have been on the Patreon, and if you want to experience that for yourself, again, for just a couple extra bucks a month, you can gain access to the entire catalog at patreon.com/ClapperCastPod. Once again, that is patreon.com/ClapperCastPod. Thank you to those who are already subscribed for supporting the show, and we hope to see you join the fun over on Patreon. With that said, let's continue our review of Trap. Let's get into our spoiler review. Spoiler discussion now. Anything we haven't discovered. I think the biggest thing is the third act. Really getting into this when they leave the concert. They do not stay in the concert. M. Night Shyamalan's daughter wants to go to their house to try to save the guy. Nick, you mentioned that you had some problems with this third act, so I'd love if you would get into those, and then we can kind of have that to lead.
The problems that Jack had with the concert is what I had with this sequence. It feels a little bit repetitive, with the trying to get him to confess, blah, 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 getting the phone, doing the thing, they go out, they get in the car, whoops, they're going out of the car, they get in the limo, whoops, he's there in the limo, and she has to escape multiple times. That started to drag a little bit until we get to the final confrontation with the wife, like that section, which is not bad per se. Like I really enjoyed it, actually. I think performance wise it's very engaging. I like that the main twist, to be honest, is that we're changing perspective. That's the only twist you can say. It's like, holy shit, the singer becomes the hero of the piece. She's the one who saves the day, basically. I was expecting the twist to be that, oh shit, the wife is actually the killer and the guy has been hiding things from her. Instead, it doesn't go in that direction, which, I mean, I appreciate, because it would have been like, what are we doing here? Like, what's the point of this story? It goes into, again, similarly to Split, into questionable, like, childhood trauma influencing us and changing us into various people. But I still liked it. I think it's very well paced. After that section in the house that then turns into the limo sequence, I really like the ending. And that's where I have like another reference point that this reminded me a lot of by the time it finished, which is Adam Wingard's The Guest, which is another movie that takes you in with a protagonist, like charismatic, charming, and then it turns out that he's a psycho. And at the end, you're kind of rooting for him to get caught, but also not really. And the final moment, you both of you have seen The Guest, right? I imagine.
I have
Carson has
not.
this. Oh shit!
Oh,
Nothing.
don't spoil it because
Nothing.
I'll send him something about it as well.
Damn, good film, very good film. I like it a lot. Favorite Adam Wingard, maybe favorite Dan Stevens. But they share a lot of
Cool.
similar DNA, and I like. I was a bit disappointed that this movie doesn't have anything like holy shit, like the final scene of Knock at the Cabin, or the parents dying on the beach in all, like anything like that. It doesn't have that moment. But I like that he's just gleeful, like, oh shit, this guy's he's gonna escape from the SWAT van as well, and he's gonna, run rampant. It's kind of bizarre if you think about. I think maybe Jack was talking about this, just um, making you sympathize maybe a little bit with a serial killer who's butchered 12 people, but also it's like Shyamalan makes movies, he makes films, he makes just experiences. They're not real, they're not set in the real world. And so, the movie finished with him just like giggling as he was removing his handcuffs. I was like, you know what? Good for you, man. I'm happy for you that you're gonna go out there and just keep doing your thing, because you're a good one. You're pulling it off well. Hats off. It's I hate the term because I think it's overused, but it is kind of just dumb fun. Like I'm watching it, even with the mid-credit scene, with the guy from the concert who was working behind the counter, just like, oh shit, it's the guy, it's Cooper. Oh man, it's Cooper. What the fuck? Like, it's silly. It's purposely, knowingly silly in a way that previous movies like The Happening should have been more of. The Happening should have been a bit more self-aware instead of leaning more into the horror. And I like that this one leans more into the humor of it towards the end without sacrificing the thrills. I think the entire section with the daughter playing the piano, trying to get the phone from him, like it's fun but also tense because you don't really know how it's going to play out. I think it needed that extra something with the family, which is a shame. I think it doesn't really come through in the end. The whole theme about family, even though the daughter crying, going to hug him, got to me just a little bit, just a smidge. I was like, oh, that's sad because he cared about her. He doesn't give a shit about his son. He just spends no time. He barely even looks at him. But he loved his daughter and she loved him. So I'm curious how you guys feel about this ending.
I can go, Cass. I'm going to leave a reference to another film I thought we were going. I'll leave that to you because I'd love to talk to you about that because I was like slightly getting hyperactive in the cinema. There are two major things here in within spoiler territory. I wanted to refrain from talking in non-spoilers. One is the use of his daughter in this film, and the second one is the setting change. You sort of nailed it for me, Nick. About that, it's hard to go into this even knowing as a fan and not trying to have a predestination aspect of knowing there's going to be a twist. Old Knock at the Cabin, not so much Knock at the Cabin, but definitely Old and Glass and Split and The Visit. There are all these notions of it. There's very rarely going to be one, and if there is, so there's very rarely not going to be one, should I say? And if there is, it's either straight laced or very very fine. This here to me, I was trying to work things out, and there's a lot of stuff we'll talk about again with certain characters. I was like, oh, is that real? Is he doing that? There's one twist here that is so obvious to me. I couldn't believe I didn't get it. The real twist here is that we move away from the concert. That's the twist. The twist is that you think you're going to spend all the time here. And it wrapped me into it because I wanted to spend even more time. And the more like I look at the things I don't like, they do still work. It's more of a personal issue, so I won't be degraded. It won't be like a grading the film lower because of what I don't personally like subjectively. I think all these things work objectively back to the film. But when we leave that cinema, the concert, I was like, that's his twist. That's him subverting expectation. We're going to take this home. We're going to make this massive scale of 16,000 people, 6,000 people, how many were there, and we're going to take it to 5 people in a house. And I think he sort of takes the atmosphere and the tension of all these police officers, but he takes you out of that. He takes you out of the thing he's built up to go into a house, and one person knows a secret that 4 other people don't. And that's a fabulous twist in this film. That's the nature of it. That's the tonal change. That's the thematic change. And I feel like that's one thing that nobody seems to get. And it only occurred to me when we get really further down the line. I was like, oh my god, that's what he's done. That's what he's done. It's not a twist of like character. It's a twist of expectation of where you think this is literally going to go. Like we're going to spend all day because he builds it with the roofs. He builds it with everything. We it goes a bit repetitive. So we think like the pacing, I think, purposely faults there as well. So that was definitely something I was like, oh, that works really well. That's why I love that aspect of it. The problem with that though is that he incorporates his daughter narrative into this like far too much. The fact that she goes behind the scenes and he breaks character, I was like, oh, this is strange. I'm vibing with it. I'm loving to know how he's going to get out of this because not once did I question this guy was not going to get away with it. That's how fundamentally like wonderfully whimsically immersive this is. Like you sort of want to see how he does it. Not that he's you want him to succeed and go murder a 13th victim, but there's this weird fascination of like mind games where I'm like, I can't guess how he's going to do this, and the writing is a step ahead of me. And it's very rare as anyone who's into film criticism or film analysis could probably say that how good that writing is. This has it. It's always a step ahead of you. You don't know where it's going to go. And to that degree, it utilizes his daughter when she's in the house. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Then we get her in the car, and I'm like, oh my God, you subvert my expect. I thought we were going to go to where you expect, a room, final room, just them two. No. We then get him in the house, and then we're like, oh my God, we're going to do the Halloween thing. No. Then we go to a limo. I'm like, oh, we're going to drive out to Sunset. No. And then we go back to somewhere else, and we go back to the house again. There's a form of, that's where I was like, my deleted scene is the limousine. Does it work? Yes, it's really fun, and he subverts expectation because she ultimately gets out of there, and somehow he gets out of the car. But that to me is a 8 minute long sequence where you could get rid of that and him just not being at that house. But I don't know. You support and need it. It's one of those things where you can't cut it out because it's detrimental to the flow and the narrative. But she goes back to the to see Spencer at the house. She gets in that car after that long day. I was like, just leave, just leave. She goes back to the house. Just leave. Honestly, just leave. The one thing that was a misdirect. I don't know if you two noticed it. Is that when he goes behind the scenes and we get introduced to Kid Cudi, she has an asthma. She's asthmatic, and I was like, classic misdirection. Kid Cudi, blonde wig, vile character is what it seems to be. I was like, oh, that's going to come back into it. So I felt that when she was there again, I'm like sort of projecting my idea of what I wanted to hear. But my idea was that when he finally got her back into the room after saying about my daughter's condition, I thought he was going to scare her to hyperventilate and not help her and see her die. And that's what I was on about earlier, Carson, about maybe seeing him go, not like butchering people, but really seeing the menace. And like we've seen him so welcome and warm to this character, and then he does that in her own, and she can't, she dies. But keeping her on is such a risk because I don't know anything that she's been credited as. I didn't know if she was talented. I don't know if she could emotionally convict with that with how much prowess she has, and she's quite good here as well. I think she's probably the biggest surprise to me. That would be like definitely a positive. That was really good. But negatives again, just repetitive. I don't know if you want to go into the what you thought was going to come because there was two things for me. There was the scene that you're going to talk about, I hope, next. But the one thing I was desperately sort of like, oh God, is I was so. There's no idea here, right, where we are, what year it is, right? And there was Tanaka Tower mentioned, and I couldn't remember what the tower was called in Philadelphia in Glass, right? And then we see this character who's got a British accent, who's all got grey hair. I was like, is that an older Sarah Paulson here? Are we going to do this? We're gonna go back to the well? And then there's that. I was like, maybe we'll have a joke, but then there's that scene where it's like, I'll let you go on, but it was a worry because it's very. I like the fact that we're doing self-containment again. We don't need he's done it. We don't need it, and I felt that self-contained wise, it was brilliant. And also, I'm sorry to say to just go on a little bit further, but you said earlier about a comparison, Nick, to The Guest. I don't see that all with the Adam Wingard thing. And I think for Carson to see that as well, I'd be fascinated to see where that is. To me, this was him doing his psycho. That's his Norman Bates at the end. But instead of getting arrested and accepting their fate, it's him having real fun with it, knowing that with the capability now in 2024, not 1960, and seeing someone who's severely on their own supply, I thought it was a really interesting subverted take of having his own Norman Bates, having his own Michael Myers, and the fact that we leave it on a not a cliffhanger but an ellipsis or ellipses. I always get that fucking wrong. Um, I'm like, I would like to see round two, but I love that now he's there. He's gone now. He's somewhere else, and the fact that he would leave all this family behind, or maybe he comes back from, I don't know. But I really like that idea where he's because and you know full well when he's picking up that bike and he takes the thing off the spork. I think is it the spoke off the bike wheel. You just know, and then he's laughing chaotically. I loved it. But I'm interested in what Carlos is gonna say, because I think me and you might be the only two people who were like perhaps sort of thought this, because I've not read anything else. But I'm interested if you're on the same page as me.
Well, for me, what stood out, and first I'll mention, just because you mentioned the scene with the asthma inhaler, I thought that was an interesting scene, because it comes back around to where he says that's the moment where he wanted to kill her, and I think that's when I mentioned they kind of really like establish that he's evil, because in that scene, it's like obviously she is this like source of like pureness and like, oh, she's actually a nice celebrity. I thought they did well with that. But the moment that really stuck to me is towards the end was when he was getting shot, and he gets shot multiple times, very similar to in Glass. And I was like, oh, he's not dropping because of these shots. Are we going to get a certain score kick in, and we're going to get that he has the same power of mind where he can convince himself he turns into like a monster and jumps up on the walls and starts climbing? I was ready for it. I was so like, because also there's this like very mysterious woman who has such an impact, this older woman, throughout the entire time. They don't really clarify exactly who she is. They just say she is like a specialist on this and she knows how to find people like him. And I was really ready for her to have that tattoo, pull out the sleeve.
Yes.
And just, I was really like, we're doing it. We're back in the Glass universe. Let's
he has the
go.
opposing tattoo as well, Carson, as well. I was
yes.
Like, oh.
And they make a point to show it, and it really doesn't come up. They get a little wristwatch, but they don't bring it up. And I was waiting, similar to you guys, what is this twist going to be? I kind of worked through like, okay, he is the killer. That was my first thing. Also, Nick, I was like, okay, who's actually, is it the mom? Is it the daughter? I don't know. Like, what is the situation? Is the daughter in on it? But then why is he acting?
The daughter.
And then I was like, well, I'm just thinking of ideas. And then my next idea went, is this in the Glass universe? Like, are we doing this? We're not. And again, I'm happy that we didn't, but I was really ready. And also like how it's shot. I think he's outside in the lawn, so he could easily just take off like running like he does in Glass. Like, I was really ready for that scene. Again, thank God it didn't happen. I think if it jumped the shark there, it would have been more similar. We would have been comparing it to The Watchers or The Watched or whatever it was called.
Yes.
Towards the end, because there was also like hints of that where I was like, I don't know where we're going, especially with the fake out endings. I will say that's one thing about this film is once you leave the concert, because naturally, as you mentioned, Jack, you think you're going to be in the concert. So as that's wrapping up, naturally, your body is like, okay, we're wrapping up this experience. It's time to go. But really, there's like 30 more minutes. I'd be curious to watch this on a rewatch, knowing those aren't the endings, because that's just one like nitpick for me with films is like when there's so many times where I'm ready for it to be over. I'm like, okay, we're in the final 2 minutes. And then we have this whole other scene in the limo. And okay, this is the conclusion. And then he gets away and I'm like, okay, that's fun. End of credits, he got away, what happens next, who knows? And then it's like, actually no, we're back in the house. Okay, we're doing this again. Okay, and then he did the bike and he got loaded up. That's great. Oh, there's still more of this. It becomes a little bit exhausting for me, and I just start to get a little bit ticked off where I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. Like, even if it's good, I'm just ready to go. But I think overall I'm happy that it all stayed pretty grounded. I did not need this to become Glass. I did not need this to become The Watchers. I didn't need to see him like transform into a big fairy and fly away or whatever. I felt good about where we went.
If anything, I imagine if it turned out to be related to The Sixth Sense and the old lady was speaking to the dead.
No, that's something I questioned as well. when he sees the old woman in the bathroom, and then when he sees the victim with the oil, which I thought was excruciating to watch, that was horrible to see, and everything turns off and it's just them two. And I was like, is his daughter really there? And then she interacts with people. It's like, oh, because there's a lot here going into it. And I think that it's difficult for a filmmaker, arguably, probably to know that. I think that's what comes into our issue, Carson, probably yourself, Nick. I think he's writing it in a fact of they might know where I'm going here. Let's go. Plan B. But I think it probably comes at a detriment of trying to be overtly disingenuous to the audience in a positive, trying to be positive and misdirection. But it ultimately comes at sort of this issue of pacing and sluggishness. But again, back on I know we're making up a narrative here about the glass connection, but the tattoo was what, like, I was like, because I'm sorry, I'm not believing any of this stuff after Split. As in this, I literally was like gobsmacked in that cinema. Like I've spoke about 2015. That's a childhood dream for me. I've wanted that for 15 years, seeing Unbreakable, and having that and a Matrix sequel in my own lifetime. I'm done. I'm so happy. Everything now, and I'm being deadly serious now. Everything I get cinematically, it will just be. I'm just be thankful for. But I'm absolutely sound. I don't need a Star Wars sequels. I'm not interested in any of that. I got a Matrix sequel in my lifetime, and I got a Glass sequel. I got an Unbreakable sequel twice, and I got to see it in a cinema, and they both got me. And to see this type of stuff, you've got to sort of second guess him now, because I think there's the idea of, I know that TriStar own parts of Glass and so on, and this is through Warner Brothers. So that was strike number one for me as well, because there's a Universal with TriStar. So that was strike number one. But there was moments in here of misdirection where I think it's just written perfectly. The tattoos are excellent. They mention it, and he has the earring, and we hear it, and he's like, oh, he's got this rabbit tattoo. There's a strange thing about aspect about that where there is something to that, and it's not said. And I think an M. Night Shyamalan, maybe 15 years ago, would feel the need to express what that is. And yet here, I think he's so in tune now with what he wants to do. He doesn't care about anything else. He allows the film to flow in a certain way which feels natural to the progression of the feature. That tattoo doesn't come back up again. Does it derail anything for us? No. Would it derail if we had to explain it? Yeah, I think so. So I see a meticulous filmmaker now, maturing even in a second act of his filmography. But again, like I said, there's a lot of misdirection here, and I think the narrative here is very, very interesting. Of, you said, I think fake out endings is an interesting term, and it would be hard pressed to argue with that terminology here to an excessive point. I did think the one last strike here. I was thinking, because you see Alison Pill in the pre-credits, which I didn't particularly like. I would hope this film just started. We do this pre-credit sequence thing, not pre-credit, sorry, the actual credit sequence in itself. I don't. I know this is like flagrantly like egotistical to say, but I just didn't think it was needed at all. I would rather just arrive at this place. I don't know what it added aside from title cards, probably for billing. Her name was mentioned. She's not in this. And I was like, I wonder if she's the concert marquee. I wonder if she comes as a manager or something. And then we go away and we find her, and I'm like, third act, does that Machina here? We're going to do something then. She's very stoic, and the fact that she his daughter's character, I'm not sure his daughter, questions that to her about the butcher. I was like, oh, I like this. We're gonna see another manipulation. But I think in hindsight, I'm glad that it didn't retain. It didn't sort of go into that direction. It retained its own theme, because I think too much of that adds questions of, right. But I also thought it was interesting. I'll be very, very quick here. It's. I think you mentioned it, Carson, about like there's holes in the actual trap itself. Didn't feel like it was very well thought out. I think it probably adds a little bit of context to that. Is that the information that were given was actually from his wife, which I thought was interesting in consideration. But I also thought that how I'm Night Shyamalan's daughter, I failed to, I don't want to butcher her name, in the car tries to do the psycho thing on him. Yeah, I'm your mother, and he doesn't buy it. And I was like, well, maybe that because it has to come from an authority and it's actually his wife doing it. I thought that was going to be a layer. Very much glad it isn't. I'm glad that Alison Pill, she rocks this. She rocks this. So again, you talk about like physical manifestation, external emotion. her Alison Pill and actual daughter are terrific. Even his Cooper's daughter in the film. I think the women steal the show here. Even though Josh Hannah's outstanding, they just steal the show because they've got to carry so much weight. And that she's with the close up of her eyes, just like it's just constant, like this watery thing over her eyes that she's gonna break, but she's not. She's holding on to something. I'm like, oh, here we go, because you've got again the minute details here with M Night. You've got to go like as a nerd, but you don't see tears really roll down, and then he goes at the two fingers there. I'm like, oh, and I love the creativity here. You talked about off air about creative writing. God, this is you guys, isn't it? Like I love the fact that I'm second guessing someone who's second guessing me, watching a character who's second guessing everything, who everyone else is second guessing. It's like this myriad of just like and prism of unpredictability. But everything that I feel like you guys spoke, not necessarily detrimental to the film, is if there's one word of it, it feels slightly excessive. I think that's why I'll end on this a little bit. I just felt everything was a little bit too excessive, but that's not really out of character for someone who made The Happening or Old. You know, that's excessive. So I think it found a really nice boundary and balance for me. But for others, there's a yawn. I think somewhere a sluggish nature to it, definitely.
I guess it does take a type of person in the third act to have a little boost because you think it's going to become Glass. So I guess, you know,
Yeah.
or I'd be curious how it plays for people who don't put that together.
I think there's just us two. I think
No,
as this
literally.
comes out, this might be breaking new ground here. I tell you something, just very briefly. I would love to know the pre-production history of this. I'm not going to say we're not right here. I would think this perhaps may be a certain draft of Split. That's right, because Kevin Crumb was in the Unbreakable draft. Split is a different thing entirely. I could see this being the as because we get to a concert. David Dunn's in the stadium. It feels weirdly close to that universe to a point. I know people are going, Jack, calm down. Like if you can't see Carson's like, stop now, stop about the glass thing. But I have to say this because I can't let it down. I'll take my medication later, don't worry. I'll have some water and calm down. We're not getting on the Star Wars thing last week. This is me calm. I've only sworn twice. I'm very calm. It's the Sunny D next to me. This is too close to this universe for me to be at least not have a slither of energy that this was a second draft. The David Dunn at a concert thing is it the concert thing because he's now selling in Glass. He sells monitors. He's selling CCTV, and then this has all been bugged with CCTV, and then you've got the Josh Hart thing. One thing I'll push onto you two, right? Aside from the Glass thing, which is we all know that we're on some there. Did anyone, because it's becoming a meme now, it's going to become a meme. Did anyone else feel it was slightly strange for him to take the shirt off?
Well, he was getting ready to murder
Why
his
not
wife.
take your pants off then?
Give something to the ladies and the boys.
I just thought it was very like okay, and obviously you get to again the Kevin Crumb thing. I'm sorry, but he takes the top off. I was like, where are we going here? Like again, like Unbreakable ends at the. I'm sorry, I will move on in a minute. But Unbreakable ends at the house. It starts in another house, and we're ending here in dark shadows. Everything is obscure for a guy who's perfectly scene blocking at the opening. There was purposefulness about separating characters there in the kitchen. The actual kitchen now curved blocks certain things of how we would see someone, especially when he walks to the table and she's walking round, and obviously we know she's doing something with a bag then. But there's like I don't know, they felt like very conscious there. So you're gonna have to move on to some from Glass now, but to me I'm sorry, I'm telling you now. This is a stealth sequel. It's in
You doing
universe.
this?
It's the soldier to Blade Runner. That's what it is.
You doing this with not one but two Glass posters surrounding you, I think just says something about you. And
Yeah, I actually didn't think about that when I was dying. Yeah. Anyway, you two, do you have anything else fault with it? It doesn't remind you of anything else?
Yeah, well, maybe we can transition to final thoughts because we have been here for a while. I think we've kind of ran through this trap. If we're talking about Glass for 20 minutes, I'll just say overall, again, I really like the film. I would be really curious to watch this. Number one, with friends. Number two, just again on a second viewing, knowing where it goes. A very, very engaging thriller, very psychological, very well written, very, very, very well acted, very well shot. I wouldn't say this is bad. I would say this is really good. Not to trigger Jack. Nick, what are your final thoughts on Trap?
Pretty much the same as yours. It's lacking that extra emotional engagement for me to truly connect with it on a deeper level. But for what it is, which is at the end of the day just like a pure entertainment piece, it's a win. It's a big win in my book. One of the more entertaining films that I've watched in the cinema recently, to be honest, because I've seen I think like the last ones were like Bike Riders, Fall Guy, whatever. It's just like fuck, man, just so long, so boring, dull. This one knows what it wants to be. Shyamalan is having fun. Saleka is, does a very fine job in her first role, which turns out to be a featured prominent role. Just all around very good. And I just like a movie that has this type of ending, just like so joyful despite the very dark implications with it. But as the Josh Hartnett, I love Josh Hartnett. I've been a fan of him for a long time, even though he's not been in the best movies. But he just has that something that makes him just likable, appealing to me. It feels very earnest. It feels like a very earnest performer. Uh, and to see him finally have a role like this, where he can freely chew the scenery, he was meant to do this. Like, he never really got the chance. He was like the cool kid in Faculty and the edgy teenager in Virgin Suicides, and then the brooding, charismatic werewolf in Penny Dreadful and all that. But just here, he gets to
Black
have
Dahlia.
fun. Well, yeah, Black Dahlia is one of the best things about Black Dahlia. The tormented, like it's always like these very serious roles. To see him let loose in a movie that's this light and this fun, just like pure cinematic fun. Oh, I think that's ultimately, I agree with you, Carson. Like a rewatch of this will definitely make it even better in my book. Though I doubt it will surpass other films. I was looking at my ranking. Like I've put this between Signs and Split because I have some issues with the ending of Split, just thematically, but just yeah, it's like number 6 or 7.
Wait, what is your rating? Wait,
Let
what is
it
your
pass.
ranking?
Let it pass.
Let me get the.
I'll look at it later.
I'll share it later for people. They can find it on Letterboxd.
Taking a break from the episode, I want to tell you guys about a great sponsor we have for today's episode, and that is Zencastr. Now, look, we've been recording podcasts for a long time here on ClapperCast, and in that time, we have used multiple platforms to record and edit our episodes, but since going to Zencastr, we haven't looked back. Zencastr is an incredibly easy and free-to-use platform where you can record both audio and visual for your podcast. No more downloading apps or struggling to connect with guests. Instead, you can share a link to literally anyone and have them join through their browser for an episode to make your podcast streams a reality. Not only can you record with studio quality visual and audio, but you can also edit in a breeze. We love using Zencastr, and if you want to use Zencastr yourself, let me tell you about a pretty good deal. While yes, you can use Zencastr for free, there are also some great tools with a paid plan. If you want to go ahead and get yourself a paid plan to make your podcast dreams a reality, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code ClapperCast, and you will get 30% off your first month of any Zencast paid plan. Again, let me tell you, I have been through the market. I have seen the different sites. I've seen the different apps. I've seen what everyone is using, and nobody is doing it like Zencastr. We love you here on the podcast, Zencastr. We wouldn't be what we are without you, and we would love to see all of our listeners go use Zencastr. Remember, code ClapperCast at zencastr.com/pricing to get 30% off your first month of any Zencast paid plan. With that, let's go back to the episode. Jack, what are your final thoughts?
to reiterate what I said in the opening, I think going to these films by M. Night Shyamalan, I think there's still a form of uneasiness about if he's going to hit the landing, and that trepidation I have, I feel like is so unwarranted now. I think I'm the last 5-6 features he's made, I've really enjoyed, and this is just another terrific entry into a really interesting canon where we're watching a filmmaker who was, and not to beat around the bush, has come back from the brink of not really being able to get jobs in the commercial hemisphere, and then having to really sort of remortgage his house. And I just think it's really powerful to watch someone at this point now who's like, oh, you thought I was done. Like, then we're going a decade on now from the visit, and he's just having so much fun. And I think that theme is so intoxicating while watching this. Everybody's just at their A game. I thought Josh Hartnett was incredible, just having fun with a character who was psychotic. The film having fun with you on a narrative level. The film having fun on a tonal level. Again, from what you said, Nick, of watching quite a few, and this is going to make her appearance a little bit later, watching a few stuff lately, 3-hour versions of films, and not very good ones to begin with, and slogs, and people in cinema having a very egotistical viewpoint of their own work. It's quite a palate change watching this, of watching filmmakers make risks that are creatively fun and never at the detriment of its own being, which I think is a very rare circumstance. I really enjoyed this. I think that I would want to rush and watch this again, but I actually really like the fact that there are parts of this I may have missed, and there are parts of this I've caught that I feel other people haven't, and I really like that mystery of it. I really like the fact that I don't want this to settle on me as of being black and white. I quite like the fact that there's a lot here where you can question things, and I know we've got our own. Some of us have got our own film theories about this, but what a pleasant experience to go watch this. And then next week we've got Alien Romulus as well. What a great next few weeks, and from doing the blockbuster series as well, it's so fun to talk about features that have no ego, have no weight, have no auteur or authorship on them, have no baggage of excess material. Just to go in this and watch one experience and let it hit and then walk out, but then it still feel like it's taken over you. Very rare that you go in to watch something as one only, and it's like, oh, let's go watch Star Wars, or let's go watch a new superhero movie, which is no problem at all. But if that's a cinema experience, I loved it. I really did love it. I'm really glad I got a screening for this, because it was difficult to find times for this, and we haven't done another film beginning with Borderlands, Eli Roth. It's interesting to see these two come out, and there was a conversation about which would make more money, and original IP and original IP, and I think the question's sort of been asked. So I'm hoping next week is another really good week. Fede Alvarez and Ridley Scott said, "Don't fuck it up," and I think you follow the man, the myth, the creative as Ridley Scott. But I think M. Night Shyamalan should be really proud here. I think his daughter should be really proud. I hope it makes its money, and we get to see more and more on these. And if they're all self-financed, then no problem at all. I just hope people go watch it. I hope there's I hope it does. I think it'll do really well on streaming. I think it'll do really well on DVD and stuff like that. So yeah, another brilliant M. Night Shyamalan. But we don't. I'll tell you something now. I promise you now. I did this with Luca, and I said that I didn't. I had difficulty with Luca, and I watched Challenges, and we did that on the podcast. I was like, I can't go into this ever again, and ever think that we won't get God tier, as you would. This is the same now. I'm not Shyamalan. I'm not bothered now. I'm so excited just to see that film. So yeah. If anything, I've got to be there till day one. The stands.
Absolutely. Well, if you want to watch Trap, which I think we all highly recommend you do, you can find it in theaters right now. And I would recommend it in the theater. I think it will do really well on streaming, but this is one where I think the intensity and the ride plays well in the theater. So I would recommend it. Let's get to our question of the week in honor of Lady Raven. We're asking, what is your favorite musical performer or band from a film? I will start because I have actually quite a few options this week. I really kind of struggle to narrow this down. You go Sing Street from Sing Street. You go See from A Ghost Story. I really like some of his songs in A Ghost Story. I think that's like a weirdly underrated part of that film. Hedwig and the Angry Inch we talked about kind of indirectly last year on the Patreon. That's a great one. The band in La La Land. I think that's like my one flaw with La La Land is he joins this band and it's supposed to be shit narratively, but like actually it's an absolute banger.
With John Legend, or was it?
Yeah, John Legend, and it's like you don't know jazz, but it's like this sick song that I still listen to be honest. But of course, being me, I have to go to the Dynamos from Mamma Mia, the best musical band to ever grace Greece, and a great band overall. Nick, what are your favorite performers?
I also have multiple choices. One I don't know, it's like an honorable mention, but I was thinking just like seeing when there's live performance happening. It's the opera sequence in Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation. I
Oh,
think
great choice.
an amazing sequence. An underseen film, just in general, is This Must Be the Place. It's an Italian
Oh, wow,
film
okay.
starring Sean Penn, and it
Oh, wow.
has music from Talking Heads, and it has a sequence with David Byrne himself singing "This Must Be the Place," which is one of the best renditions of the song I've ever heard. I don't think you can even listen to that outside of the movie. I don't think this ever been put out as a single, as a cover, whatever. It's just amazing moment of just pure joy in that film. Speaking of recent releases, Sloppy Jane, I saw the TV Glow singing Claw Machine. Uh, that sequence, man. I love that scene so much. It's very Twin Peaks The Return inspired. And lastly, speaking of Twin Peaks, from Fire Walk With Me, Questions in a World of Blue, Julie Cruz singing the song with the character of Laura Palmer just like entering the Roadhouse diner and tearing up as she listens to it. Always gets me. It's one of those very, very few film scenes where every single time that I watch it just makes me tear up. It's beautiful, beautiful. One of my favorite performances ever. And just in general, shout out to every live performance that's present in Twin Peaks, Fire Walk With Me, and The Return, including Nine Inch Nails in episode 8 of The Return, which is one of the best things ever put on TV.
I
Those are my
hope they never
picks.
sell out and do anything corporate, do you?
Yeah, like challengers.
No, maybe like a Disney, maybe like Disney. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe a certain
I'm
franchise,
joking.
certain cult leader. I don't know. Weird.
There's
Jack,
a
what are your
few
favorite
there.
musical artists?
There's a few. So I've got one this week, one, and I couldn't. I
What?
would. It felt really disrespectful to choose anything else. I'm a lover of things, right? Where I like one thing from a filmmaker, and something totally random I also like comes together, and I watch it, and I don't know it's going to happen, and that is Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Relax in Body Double. Right.
Yeah.
That I love that song. So I remember listening to it on the radio, picking my sister up from the airport once with my dad years ago. I just love. I've got the 12-inch vinyl. Like there's something about that song. You got Two Tribes and stuff like that. I love their music to a certain degree, and then knowing the history of Relax and stuff, and it being banned from the pops, it's just like the British broadcasting thing of showing music videos. And I remember watching because I remember watching years ago. It would have been 2017 maybe, and then all of a sudden you've got like the Bill Maher impersonator. I'm joking, but you're coming down the steps
Looks
like in a
like him.
music video, yeah, and all of a sudden it's you have like this strange synth noise. I'm like, what? Because you get that's my audio cue, and I was like, no, and that's the actual video they shoot on set for the actual video that's shown in the American audiences, and just like Brian De Palma, Frankie goes to Hollywood, but it's Relax in a film that's crazy. God, it's like perfect to me. And then if I had to do an honorable mention, I'd probably say something with Blue Monday and by New Order. But that's sort of just a song, whereas them actually doing the music video on set, a film within a film, I think it's amazing. Like Brian De Palma at that 89 as well, 88, 89, maybe 80, could be 80. I think it's 80. It's 89. I think it is, isn't it? Because it's before it's just after The Untouchables, but it's before Carlitos Way in '93, and then he did Bonfire of Vanities in '90. We'll move on for that. But yeah, I love it when those two things come together. So it would be that, and it's a very strange incorporation because your Twin Peaks things are at the latter. This one is just like halfway through. We just run a live performance and a music video. It's just and the camera work, the crane with Brian De Palma, just chaotic nonsense. It's a mess. It's amazing. I love it.
So many extras.
Once you mentioned that, I could not get out of my head. So I'll probably be watching that this weekend.
Love it. I also totally failed to mention Ali from A Star Is Born, so I have to mention that as a Gaga stan.
Great choice.
A lot of great options there. Now let's get to our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I will go first because, God, I have a few to talk about. The only really new release I watched is #AMFAD, All My Friends Are Dead. This is the horror movie starring Jojo Siwa, released to streaming this week. Come on, guys. Stay with culture. Be relevant.
Who's this guy?
You don't know Jojo Siwa?
No.
First of all, he's Italian, and B, he's never lived. So, I tell you what, just Google them.
Jojo
Siwa, yeah. Google the car they drive. Just Google everything. You know. Yeah. Why possess you to watch?
My friends were watching it. And I'm not gonna be like hide my eyes. Bottom of the barrel trash. Do not watch it like a 1-star film. Obviously, same director as The Collector in the series, and he wrote multiple of the Saw films. Some of the best Saw films he wrote. So sorry as a Saw stan. Unlike I guess some people, I had to keep up with his career, which I regret.
I watched. That is a low. I'm sorry. I leave you to pieces. That is a low.
Jesus.
Outside of that, I watched some good old movies. I've been watching this month films celebrating anniversaries. I watched Abel Ferrara's Pasolini, which was really good. What a little gem here. Willem Dafoe is fantastic. Maybe there are some larger conversations that they don't really get into here, just not the focus of it. But ultimately, I really was impressed by this one. Eventually, we're going to have to find a way to get this guy on the podcast, but we have not yet, but that will one day happen. I watched Spielberg's The Terminal finally, which I think is dare I say, one of his more underrated efforts. If I was having a family movie night, this is such a good one to put on. There's some real craft here, some great performances, a real crowd pleaser in a lot of ways. Maybe should have leaned a little bit more into the true story because it's wild to watch this and be like, oh, it's so fictional. But then it's actually a real story. I will say the production design, because they built this entire airport at a little scale. It was quite incredible when you look into it. But I thought it was quite underrated. The Babadook I watched, y'all are lying on this film. It's not good, guys. What was this? I was so excited and hyped up for so long. Oh my God, guys, The Babadook is such a good movie. They're putting it back out in theaters even for the 10-year anniversary. Thought it was really not great. Jennifer Kent, I really like her second film. I didn't know she had a third film come out, but it's out, so I will watch that eventually. I watched it came out 2020 on streaming. I, again, never heard of it until I was looking. I was like, what is she doing? Because
she did one of the Cabinet of Curiosities films. Is that what the one maybe? With Andrew Lincoln and Essie Davis.
It's possible. Because The Nightingale, I really like. It's a brutal, haunting feature. Wouldn't prepare yourself, very trigger good. Warning for everything. But a very good film. But The Babadook didn't do much for me. I watched Dinosaur 13, the documentary from the guy who made Apollo 11. This is on a dinosaur that was found and the legal struggle surrounding it. It was fine. Kind of mildly boring. It's kind of as interesting as you would think legal drama surrounding dinosaur bones would be. I watched The Invisible Man's Revenge, which I enjoyed. It's kind of, I don't know, the Invisible Man sequels are always kind of weird for me, and I've only seen Returns and Revenge, not the two more interesting ones. But this one adds some interesting lore as far as turning back visible, but I don't know, it didn't really go anywhere with it, sadly. I watched Dracula Untold because we'll be watching we'll be watching some modern takes on Universal monsters over the next few months. And I was like, I haven't seen Dracula Untold. We're not doing it on the podcast. So I was like, let me just get through it. I mean, it's not a 1-star film, right? I think specifically capturing the hauntingness and tragedy of a Dracula character, adding some humanity. There are moments here that works. Overall, quite boring and dull. The visuals didn't really grab me, but I think there was something here to where at least I can kind of respect what it was going for. And then finally, I watched A Fistful of Dollars, because a little thing that like no one's talking about is Clint Eastwood is releasing his final feature as a director this year that nobody's mentioning, which I just find very odd. But I haven't seen a lot of his work as an actor either. I've never gone back
Oh
and watched
wow.
like his spaghetti western, so I jumped in with this. It was fine. I think once you realize, and I just watched the Kurosawa film this is based on, and also I'm just not a Western person, but I think once you realize this is like not even a remake, but a direct ripoff of a film that came out 2 years before, it does lose a little bit of its greatness. I mean, the performances are great, the score is phenomenal here, and the story is good, but like, yeah, I could also watch a film. Well, I couldn't, let's be clear, not to devalue filmmaking, but like, it is quite easier to make a really great film when you're just copying a film that came out 2 years earlier. So I don't know. It didn't impress me as much. I think it impressed a lot of people, but still, for a Western, I enjoyed it. And I think that says something. That's like a big leap to get over, and the film did. So shout out Clint Eastwood as always.
Question: was this your first Sergio Leone as well?
Yes, I believe so.
Ooh la la,
Let me
nice.
double check.
I think you'll really like Once Upon a Time in America.
I am watching that this month.
Just yeah, because I love to talk to you about that because I have a very good reading of that film. Not Christ, I would say that, but I have an interesting reading of that film, which I think a lot of people don't acknowledge. And watching Trap could not set you up any better. Also,
Exciting.
Yeah,
I'm excited to hear as a prequel to Glass, because I know that's probably
no,
where this
no,
is
not
going.
this. No.
With that, that's going to be everything I watched. I had a busy week. Jack, what have you seen this week?
I've had a bit of a short week, to be fair, because I've just been doing those Star Wars things. But I did watch. I've been on like wanting to watch Sam Raimi movies for some reason. I don't know where this has come from. I want to watch Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, because I've got an open mat cut of it, or it could be an IMAX cut. I'm not too bad. I desperately want to see it. I've just got like really want to watch Sam Raimi stuff. So second best of that, by the Evil Dead series, I watched Bubba Hotep with Bruce Campbell. Made like
Nice.
$500,000. It was really fun. It definitely felt television in a sense of its aspect ratio didn't really help, and also it felt slightly cheap and very much underwhelming with the big ideas it had. But as a little bit of a B move, I thought it was quite fun. I'm going to talk on one now, and then I'm going back to the two because I've just seen them now, so give me flashbacks. For I'm not going to mention a lot of this because we just did Uncut Gems on Jakob Flash's birthday. He's 40. He really love me saying that out loud. 40. And he chose True Lies, which is like a fan favorite of his, and I love that film. I got it on video when I was little, and it's very difficult to find a good version of that film. The 4Ks are trash. James Cameron will repent for his sins of that transfer. but I have a open mat 178.1 version of it. God, it looks fabulous. First $100 million movie. We spoke about it like 4 hours as you do on Gems, but it was just listening to someone's love spark, just bring it up. And then Randy Burroughs, co-host, was a bit more middle than we had Tony Larder on Sofa Cinema on Letterboxd, who was a bit more distant to it. Such a good conversation. But our first $100 million movie, and he shoots all the final act during the broad daylight with rare projection and miniatures. God, like, you just don't get that anymore. It's just a spark of really good filmmaking conversation, but just like Trap as well, weirdly enough. It's like just watching a director just steamroll through it, and nobody's like second guessing him. And then the big two, which weirdly Carson has just not wanting to talk about this week, which I feel like big releases, is that I don't know if anyone knows this, but the Rebel Moon director's cuts came out.
Oh no.
And I've had a little bit of time off work because I've been working away, and I thought
Why?
I'll watch them both. And I've got a slight hot take for the first one, and we'll get to the second one. I know Max Sands Vincent's going to review them, so he's going to be the positive. No, don't. This is not the Jojo Siwa thing. I'm not gonna give an obscure statement about this. Don't worry. But I know Max Sands is a lover of Zack Snyder. The first one, part one, is an hour and a half long. I think it's a mild improvement on the first film. Mild. It's excessively big, but you get more a little bit of character moments, especially one with Charlie Hunnam, which gives his turn, because anyone could have guessed it, a little bit more leeway. That being said, I don't. Again, right, and I'm glad we're talking about Trap. But when you look at a filmmaker here like M. Night Shyamalan, who's undoubtedly one step ahead of everybody, and he opens his film up, and your director's got an idea of what he's doing. Rebel Moon Part One opens with a different opening, with the ninth secondary character in the film. The ninth secondary character, not any of the opening team, not anyone else. The ninth secondary character who's billed, who nobody cares about. We get to see this big thing that never comes back into it because it's no nuance. Oh, there's now naked women around here who are getting tortured. Blood is like being shot out of people like it's thick squibs. It just looks strange. It comes like jelly. It's very. People are now like having Sophie Patella's like naked in like 2 sex scenes here. It's all just like rapidly overblown with excessiveness in order to be like, well, we've got your PG-13 version here. Look at this 18 version. Look at this 15 version. Like you're not meant to see. It's no improvement over what you've already seen. It's wildly excessive. And there's just a severe lack of the ability to have restraint here. So after that, obviously, as a completionist as I am, I could have watched any fucking thing else. Let's see what he's done with part 2. And part 2, ironically, right, is just the same film as the theatrical cut, with an hour to I think 45 minutes longer of just people talking absolute shite. Like you can't have nuance or this cinematic flair of watching people cut through a wheat field, and then there is a 35 to 40 minute exposition sequence where everyone. It was in the theatrical cut. It's even worse now. They're all sat around a bar the night before. They're all going to die. It's just like fingers crossed, and we have like vignettes of them all, why they're all there. And I suppose when you write it, it feels like the natural place to do it. But it just, you talk about sluggish pace, it just stops talking about boring people who are boringly wanting to fight against this empire as rebels. And then you've got Duna Bay, who's fabulous as an actress, with lightsabers. And then there's a lightsaber at the end, and it's all just stupid and silly. Oh, but there's a big ship here, like it's a dreadnought, like it's from Star Wars. And it doesn't help going having watched the Star Wars film before, but knowing this was a 2013, 2014 pitch as like, well, I'm going to show how the rebels like fought after before New Hope, before even the Rogue One conversations. Like it's so adamantly obvious it was Star Wars, and he had to retcon loads of stuff. It's just boring. It's vile. It's tedious. And I'm going to say this now. I'm going to contradict. If I ever had to describe a film as singularity as bad, every single aspect of production here is a disaster. It's one of the worst films ever made of just pure offensive ego, and I recommend everybody watch them, because if anybody wants to feel like what a director's cut and a theatrical cut, what shouldn't remain in a film, because like me, I love watching extended versions of films, I like watching director's cut. These need to stay in whatever landfill they were from, whatever salt mine the 70mm prints are on, leave them there. They've cancelled his Army of Dead series because he wants to go forward with this. He's retconning Army of the Dead as the virus being from one homeland here. Like, what we're doing here, I don't know what's happened with him. And don't put any of this in the SEO stuff when you post this, because there'll be like 9,000, 10,000 emails about, the Snyderverse. It's nothing to do with that. It's just frightening how creatively bankrupt this guy is, in the irony that he's writing his own stuff. And I like his Dawn of the Dead remake. I like his Army of Dead things that he did. I liked his Watchmen adaptation. I liked 300, but their adaptations, his own writing with Sucker Punch and this. Oh dear me! It's Jekyll and Hyde of a filmmaker. I've never seen something as apparently obtuse as a filmmaker who can write for themselves, and a filmmaker who literally has no idea what to do and it's so egotistical, it's so eccentric, it's vulgar, it's uninteresting, it's devoid of imagination. He's trying to elevate a group of people farming. What? Like Terrence Malick couldn't do that with Badlands for me. The other thing he made with Richard Gere, I can't remember
Days
what it's
of
called
Heaven.
now. Yeah, Days of Heaven, which it's beautifully shot, but to me, there's like little substance. This is just, oh my god, what is this? And have you two seen? I don't know if you. I don't dare ask Nick because Nick's like, who? But Carson, you've seen the theatricals, haven't you? I'm
Not
sure
the
you've
second
seen
one. I watched the first one.
that. I think honestly, they are barbaric. I've never seen something a fall from grace like this. From what happened on Justice League, whatever happened there to the Snyderverse, to see someone who the film community love it or hate them resounded to build this person back up to make these. Honestly, I'll have to leave it there because I feel sick. But go and watch them. I think you'll love them, Carson. Nick, you'll
Yeah, I
never
think
see them
I'm
because
good.
it's just too avant-garde for you. But this, Carson, it's like
I can imagine. Do
I
you
think
think if I
retroactively the most grateful choice I've ever had, like I'm so happy I made that choice, was when I removed Rebel Moon from the schedule, because we would have been here talking about it, and
Jesus.
now we're not, and that's great.
I can't wait to read Max's reviews because he has such an affection for the director. But I have yet to see anybody without skin in the game who can object to the review of those and be positive. I honestly, why are we opening a film with a 9 secondary character? What are we doing here? It's like opening this film with Riley's friends. Like, what are we doing here? Like, what are we
Bold
doing?
choice, taking a wild swing.
I wouldn't say
I'll,
bold. Bollocks, more like, but I wouldn't say bold.
I'll have to give them a shot. There's something in I kind of like want to see the director's cut because I haven't seen any of the theatrical scenes even, to be honest, of Rebel Moon. So there is something that I'd
I'm
like to
going.
go just
I'm fully
straight into
prepared
the
now.
directors.
Fully prepared now to see your letterbox and just see you no review, but just a heart under it, and just be like,
Yeah.
oh,
No, I always
I'll,
review
I'm,
them. I always review them.
these are so vile. They're so vile, and they're on a platform that I have to pay for. I'm going to delete the Netflix off my phone and my iPad and my television. I'm not paying for it anymore. I don't pay for it anyway because of my parents. I pay for their Amazon Prime. They pay for that. I'm not having anything to do with Netflix again after this. I cannot stand for this. These are horrific. But watch them because I'm very excited to hear your opinions.
well, Nick, what have you seen this week?
Um, I haven't seen anything as thought provoking as the Rebel Moon series. I continued a little bit of like my light streak with TV by watching Peacemaker. I had 2 days of like a lot of very grueling work. I was like, you know what, just fuck it, why not? John Cena doing silly shit for 6 hours, whatever. It was actually pretty good. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's all right. I think this I have such low standards and constant contempt nowadays for anything that's superhero related. That's something that is small scale, low stakes, character driven, and humorous actually works. But I think that's ultimately just a James Gunn touch. Not the biggest fan of him, but he at least he has personality. At least he has things to say. And like John Cena, which helps. I think he's a very good comedic actor. Um, Movies, I've finally watched American Gigolo by Paul Schrader. Carson, get on it. This is prime Carson material. Very interesting film. A lot of overt queer undertones that Schrader himself said that he would have put more into the actual text of the film if he had made it afterwards. I watched the anthology film Spirits of the Dead, which is 1968. Louis Malle, Federico Fellini, and another director. They made like horror shorts adapted from Edgar Allan Poe. The first two kind of suck. They're just like nothing short stories. The Fellini one is amazing. It's on a whole other level. It's like nightmarish, a descent into Italian cinema in the award ceremony through the eyes of a drunken Terence Stamp. The devil is played by like a little blonde girl and it's terrifying. It's just a nightmare of a film. Just watch that segment on its own. It's well worth it. I watched Oliver Stone's The Doors. I love The Doors. I like Oliver
Which
Stone in general.
version?
The standard theatrical cut, not the
Go on,
extended one.
I can't respond.
I think. Wait, it was like 2 hours 20, I think, or 2 hours 15. It was like long. Good film, very good film. One of the best musical biopics I've seen. Nothing groundbreaking, but Val Kilmer playing Jim Morrison alone is worth the price of admission. In Bruges revisit, love In Bruges, perfect film. Today, also speaking of rewatches, I saw the TV Glow, perfect film. Um, and then last two, I watched Bunny Lake is Missing, an Otto Preminger film from 1965, kind of like a thriller. A perfect example of a movie that's pretty great for the first two acts, and then he kind of shits the bed in the last one, just because it's a completely wild direction that does not work whatsoever for it. And lastly, a very um, mild recommendation is The Feeling That the Time for Doing Something Has Passed, which is an indie dark comedy, you could say, from this year, about a 33-year-old woman who's into BDSM and who has a very grueling job, and it's very cut and it's very dry. It's very dry film. A lot of people have compared it to the works of Lena Dunham. I actually haven't seen anything from her yet, so I can't compare. But I really liked it. It's very frank with its portrayal of sex, but also life nowadays, of just, like doing a mundane job. Every day is exactly the same. And just like she's a submissive in her relationships, it's like you're also submissive in life. You're just like going with the flow. It's a movie that I really liked, but I also completely, totally get why some people might hate it. I don't think you two have seen it, or have you seen it, Carson? Uh,
It's on
I
my watch list, though.
I'd be interested to see what you think, because I honestly cannot tell whether you'd like it, love it, or hate it. It could be either one of those. But I appreciated it, and it helps that it's just like 80 minutes long, very short, which, considering the more languid pacing and very like stilted performances by design, it helps. It doesn't feel too tiring. So those have been the things that I've watched this week. In an interesting week, just kind of like balancing the last week of pre-production on the new short film. So I need movies that are not too demanding for my brain. And Trapped helped.
Sure.
Trapped helped a lot, to be honest. It was just like, I don't have to worry about anything, and I see a master at work just having fun.
A new M. Night Shyamalan film will help, I think, pretty much whatever you're going through at all times.
Yeah.
So with that, that's going to do it for our episode today. Thank you all for joining us. Where can we find everyone on social media? Nick?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at NikiGrind97, and also on Letterboxd, Nicolò Grasso, where you can find me nowadays just promoting the crowdfunding for my upcoming short film, Never My Love, which is going to be open for another 2 weeks by the time this episode goes out, right before we hit production at the end of August. So if you want to get early access to the film, if you want like good snippets of the production, like this is getting crazy. We're setting up a very bizarre scene inside a nightclub. I have like 20 extras. Everyone's looking to just kiss people. I created a form, and I was like, if you're comfortable with like kissing someone, otherwise just dancing. Everyone just wants to kiss people, so get ready. It's going to be kind of a wild film. Body Double 2.0 for Jack. But no, it's going to be very fun, and so stay tuned for that. Just follow me for updates on this project as well, just generally.
Jack, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on Letterboxd, Twitter, X, and at ClapperCast with the username at Jak-Luke Sharp. But thank you very much for having me. Do you know, it's like what Nick said a bit earlier about like how watching films and like the trap helping. It really has been a really nice experience watching this and enjoying it and talking about it as well. I hope it makes some money. But thank you very much for recording. Thanks very much for inviting me. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
No worries. And you can find me on Twitter at BP_movie reviews, Letterboxd just Carson Timar. Again, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week for our Alien Romulus review, and then back for 2 weeks in a row, double feature our final summer blockbuster episodes, starting with James Cameron's Avatar and Avatar: The Way of Water. We've got news on number 3 this week, so I'm pumped to revisit the series. I am ready. We will get into it then. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.